One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome in, one and all, to another episode of the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. It's Trey Reeves, it's Garrett Turner, one more time without Mitch. He is attending to some, personal business. If you know any contacts in the DFW area that could help our boy out and maybe put some legal pressure on a certain apartment complex, I think he might appreciate that. But we'll let him tell that story another day on the pod. Garrett, springtime is coming in full swing. The allergies and pollen are hitting me like crazy. And you, sir, do not have an updated Texas Rangers hat. What's the deal? What's the deal with that?
I did not have the updated Texas Rangers hat. Unfortunately, I was not able to purchase one before they pulled it. Because that was the immediate thing was I see that going on Twitter, and I'm just like, all right, I need to get me my Titas Rangers hat. And then they're like, no, you can't buy it anymore. And I'm like, dang it, never mind. But no, you're right. I mean, spring is in full swing. We are a couple weeks away, I guess, from opening day for the Rangers, and getting pretty close. And I mean, it's exciting, and this is one of those things, especially in the DFW Metroplex, like we were talking a little bit before this. We're excited for the Rangers because things have not been so good for those other two bigger sports. Hockey's been good, but may not want to talk about the football and the baseball here in the Metroplex. Not great moments for these fan bases up here. So definitely hoping the Rangers turn this thing around and don't cave in like our buddy Mitch's ceiling and. We were teasing him last week about, needing this vacation. Like, oh, it must be so tough to recover from a great vacation. I'm like, well, when things go wrong at your apartment and apartment, leasers and the leasing office like to do what they like to do, right? And the management likes to say, well, we slapped a white coat of paint on everything. So isn't that nice? Maybe not the best thing. So we'll see. Hopefully things get better for Mitch and he's able to maybe tell that story upon return soon.
Yeah, check on your Dallas sports fans. Check on your apartment ceilings. Just check on all the things. As it's good practice here.
Make sure everybody's good.
Good practice here in the spring. Well, Garrett, tonight we are concluding our look back series. Looking at the G5, we had a lot of teams to kind of touch up on tonight. We're gonna go through this kind of fast and furious. Maybe slow down on a couple of teams to take a closer look, but kind of break the G5 into tiers just like we did with all of the power conferences. Make sure that you are following along on social media all through the offseason for all the content that we're putting out. Before you know it, preview season is going to be here, and you know that college football loves to drop random breaking news at all kinds of times throughout the year. So we'll be following along with that. We'll be following along with spring football as it gets ramped up here in the next couple of weeks. And like I said, before you know it, it's going to be summertime and we're going to be in preview season. So make sure you're following along at 3Tech Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. And check out our friends at Home Field Apparel as well. Use that code 3Tech Pod for your discount on first-time purchases. Garrett, before we jump in to the G5 breakdown, G5 in review, I've got an opening question. We're going to play a little Would You Rather here. And everybody's favorite middle school game. Would you rather be a wide receiver buried on the depth chart? Let's say like wide receiver 6, 7, 8, like you kind of get into games, but if you're playing in Road to Glory mode on NCAA or College Football 25, you're spamming that X button until you finally get into the game. Or would you rather be wide receiver 1 at maybe a lower tier G5 school? Maybe I don't want to insult anybody here, but a ULM, a Wyoming of this year, maybe not in years past, but of this year. What would you rather do? What college career path or road to glory would you rather take?
I feel like if it's at Ohio State specifically, I'd maybe rather be a receiver there just because Brian Hartline does such a good job developing receivers and was a fantastic receiver himself and did well in the pros with Miami and was a really good professional. But I mean, we've seen what Ohio State's done producing receivers the last several years. That's all Brian Hartline. That's all just him, being able to go and recruit those guys, get those guys to come play for him, and really do a good job developing them into professionals who, I mean, go watch them in the NFL. A bunch of those guys pan out to be extremely good receivers when they get there. So, I maybe rather be one of those guys because maybe you get your shot, and it seems like two or three of those guys get drafted every draft, anyways. So I'll just bank on myself and my skill. At a lot of other teams, though, like if you're just kind of buried in the depth chart at like a Michigan or a Texas or USC or pick your poison. I think I might rather be the alpha at one of these smaller schools that don't necessarily always get the love or the shine. Just because you get lots of playing time, you can put up big numbers. If it's absolutely just a terrible fit for you, then you can make the jump the next year, and there's going to be somebody that's like a mid to lower tier SEC or Big Ten team that's probably going to shell out some cash to come get you. And that's maybe a situation that's a little bit more advantageous, but I think still I'd much rather be playing because you never know what the next second holds. You never know when it's all going to come crashing down. One bad step, one bad shot to the knees, and you could be talking about your career being over, or at least over for a while. So I'm definitely in the would rather be playing, would rather get my chances to show who I am, as opposed to just being buried somewhere with a good NIL deal. But of course, I will still make that one caveat that, if it's at Ohio State, I might still rather be at Ohio State.
I think, that's it for me. Unless someone's just offering me, let's say I'm like a 3-star recruit, right? Like a real lunch pail guy. I mean, look at me. That's what I would aspire to be, not even close to being that.
I hit 3 stars. I'm feeling good.
Exactly. So I'm a lunch pail guy, 3-star slot receiver. Yeah, unless someone's offering me an absolute bag to go sit on the bench at a big program, why wouldn't you start at a G5 program? Why wouldn't you get some development? And first of all, maybe you love it there. Maybe you're in a place like San Marcos where the culture seems really good and the campus life is really fun. Maybe you're in a place like San Diego State where you get to be on the beach every single day if you want to. And I don't know. There's so many awesome destinations in the G5 that, one, you might find you like it there and you get really good coaching and you can develop and you can work on your craft around other guys that you're just absolutely grinding. And if you don't like it there, the transfer portal is right there and you can always make that jump to the power conference later. So I'd absolutely, I think I agree with you, except maybe at the top of the top, maybe if I'm just wanting to chase a ring or chase a bag, I'm going to the G5 level and I'm going to develop my craft and try to earn my way to that next jump.
Yep. And it's, again, it's not to, shade anybody in particular, but it's just to say, what, I understand that, some of these G5 programs get overlooked and, maybe not necessarily the number one focus for a lot of people. But, unless you're really getting a good chance to develop under a great coach, or getting a chance to really further a career as sort of a long-term thing, I don't know why you wouldn't rather just play. Like, you're getting a chance to play the game, right? If you're getting offered all these scholarships, you're getting a chance to play. Why would you take the chance to sit, be practice squad, and do all that for all 4 years of your career? Like, I understand sitting and waiting your turn, right? And like, you may not be ready year one, so you develop, you get a little bit more time year two, and you keep developing. But if you're wanting to go and look and play and get your chance, like, why not go to one of these smaller schools that would be thrilled to have you on campus? That seems like a good deal to me.
Absolutely. And it seems like there's just way more opportunities. Maybe this JUCO thing that's coming down the pipe might eat into those opportunities for lesser rated guys, but there's so many opportunities to prove yourself. And even if you do end up at a JUCO or somewhere like that, apparently it's not going to count towards your eligibility. So you can have the Diego Pavia origin story and still play 4 years of college ball. Well,
and the big thing too is you now have more opportunities to put yourself on the stage because G5 is finally getting a chance to prove themselves and go compete against the big boys, right? They can go compete against those power conferences in the playoff. And the more that we see that develop, it might only be one spot, but you get a chance to sit at the table. And the focus that was on some of these G5 teams this year, I think, is some of the best that we've seen, just in terms of national perspective, national narrative surrounding some of these top teams competing. Still maybe waiting to get down into those lower levels of the G5 and kind of get more into the weeds and making sure that we're talking about those. But, if you're one of those top teams, if you're a guy at Boise or a guy at UNLV, like, people are talking about you.
Absolutely. And you mentioned UNLV, we still get NIL drama even at schools like
You
that,
still get NIL.
like we did this year. Well, let's jump into our G5 in review, Garrett. We're going to start at the very top of the G5 ranks this year, and that was, of course, the Boise State Broncos. You all know the story by now, so we're not going to spend a ton of time, but just one more round of applause for the season that the Broncos had, specifically Ashton Jeanty. 2,601 yards, 7 yards per carry, and 29 touchdowns on the ground. He added some work on the receiving end as well. Not a ton, 138 yards through the air, and just one receiving touchdown. That actually surprised me when I looked that up earlier.
Funny, yeah.
But, just a fantastic story this year. Do you remember in the offseason when we were getting hyped about Malachi Nelson?
I do.
Being the starting quarterback, and then all of a sudden I think that news dropped as we were previewing the Mountain West, or maybe the day before, and I had to completely rewrite my preview that I had written for Boise State.
You're like, freaking Boise State can't figure out their quarterback situation, and so I got to rewrite the whole thing, and yeah, that was funny.
I clowned them for picking Maddox Madston, but it ended up being a good decision. He threw for over 3,000 yards, took care of the football. That was the main thing. Wasn't electric, I would say, by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely not pushing the ball downfield, not stretching the field, not dynamic. But when you have Ashton Jeanty, you're just trying to take care of the football, and he did just that. The defense was plenty fine for getting through Mountain West, and they gave Penn State all they could handle for 3 quarters in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, they did a great job this year. And they did a good job, I think, in year one of carrying that mantle for the entirety of the G5 and proving that they belonged, right? Because I think the conversation would have been really different if, maybe they came up a little bit short, maybe they didn't quite have the season that they wanted to, and they just kind of get the auto admit and, okay, we're here, and then you get smoked in the first round and you never stood a chance. Like, that wasn't what happened. Like, they had a great season, and they proved that they belonged in that conversation, right? They proved that, it's not just an auto admit. It's not just because we said so. Like, they proved that, yeah, we belong here. They got beat by a very good Penn State team. Penn State definitely controlled that football game, but there were moments in that game where this thing was pretty close, and you could have seen it, 1 or 2 bounces of the ball or a couple different conversions. We're talking about Boise State actually, kind of full on competing with them. So I think you got to give them their credit. I think that this is a big moment, not just for them, but for the rest of the G5. Absolutely going to give Maddox Madston his props in that one as well. He threw for 300 yards in that game. I know that he wasn't necessarily that guy for the majority of the year, right? But in the big moments when he was needed, he stepped up and he showed that he could. Yeah, he threw some picks. I get that. Like, he threw 3 picks. That was pretty awful. I don't, whatever. But they did move the ball, and he did keep them in that game. It was a struggle because that Penn State defense is so good.
Yeah.
But, we saw what happened even, like the next week when, the week before that, it was when it was Kevin Jennings, right? So he struggled the week before that when they were playing them. Yeah, it was snowing cold. But that's a guy who, I don't think anyone's saying that Kevin Jennings was underrated or, he's just a ho-hum guy. He really struggled against that defense. So the fact that Maddox Madston put up some numbers and, he got punched in the face, but he punched back, you got to give him his props on that one.
Absolutely. And his turnovers in that game were definitely when they were starting to force things and try to come back pretty furiously there at the end. But yeah, a great season all around, obviously, for Boise State. They're going to be one of the proverbial favorites to make it back to the playoff from the G5 level next year. They're going to be in that conversation every single year.
And Madston coming back, so that's part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll see if he can make the jump in the next year as a starter. The ones that push for the playoff were really interesting to me, Garrett, because these were all teams came up just short. All of them had shots at power conference teams, and most of them fell just short. One of them, they beat their power conference opponent, but they ended up not being as good as we thought in the preseason. So this 5-pack here, we've got Army, Tulane, Navy, UNLV, and Memphis. All of them spent some time or even finished in some cases in the top 25 this year. Of course, we had the Army Navy tracker all year long where we were kind of tracking to see, hey, what if they play in the American Championship game? What if we get that 2 weeks in a row? And yeah, I mean, it was just a banner year, first of all, for the service academies. I guess we can start there. Let's talk about the service academies. A banner year for Army and Navy, one that we haven't seen since this country was at war in Europe in the 1940s. And just a really fun story to follow all year long. But I guess the question is, do they have staying power? Both being in the American Conference, can they stay at the top of the American, or is it going to be kind of volatile? Because that's kind of the nature of service academies.
Yeah, and they typically rely on like a player, right? So it really depends on, hey, is this guy still going to be on the roster? Hey, is this guy going to come back for one more year? He just showed us he had a good year. Can he do it again? And that's really just what it's going to come down to. Honestly, can't tell you if they have more eligibility for those couple of guys right now. I'm trying to look that up on the spot, but Blake Horvath for Navy was the big reason why they succeeded. I was really impressed with him. I think overall was, impressed by several guys. Really thought that there were several guys that did a good job throughout, but yeah, just very impressed with Horvath and the job he was able to do. He ended up scoring 30 total touchdowns this last season, so big props to him in that regard. And I think
Horvath was a junior, I believe, so he should be back next year.
Yeah, I think so. So
yeah,
he should, if he is able to come back, and if he's able to if he's able to keep that production up, then I think that he'll be just fine, and Navy will be just fine in that regard. So I'm excited to see where they go from there.
Sorry, I had myself muted there for a second. Yeah, I think, and Bryson Daly, the same thing. Obviously, he was a senior this year, so he will not be back. But that system that they have at Army, as long as they can find a guy to plug and play, they're going to have a favorable schedule. The American, I think, when we think of the American, we kind of think about they had the branding for so long of like the Power Six, right? And how we're the conference that's going to be right there on the next level and right behind. It's not so anymore. I don't think that they are necessarily going to be that Power Six conference, for lack of a better term. It seems like that they've kind of been passed up, maybe by the Mountain West, certainly at the top of the Mountain West. Yeah. The Sun Belt is certainly deeper than the American is at this point. The top of the American is still really, really solid, and there's a lot of good teams that are going to be pushing for the playoff. But outside of that, the schedules are going to be loaded with a lot of teams like Rice, like Southern Miss, like several others that are just really struggling to make a bowl game every single year.
And it's hard too, because the American's been really good, and the Americans had really good production, and sort of the product's been really good, but a lot has left in recent years. And I think a lot's going to continue to go. Like, so, talk Memphis for a second. Big Seth Hennigan fan over here. I think that he's an awesome quarterback. Love what he was able to do. He had a fantastic year. Leads them to beating Florida State. Obviously, that didn't turn out to be much of an accomplishment this last year, but it's good for the brand, right? You get to say that we beat Florida State. It's a big-time program. You went into their house and did it, and so that's a good thing that you can put on your resume. They beat West Virginia in the Frisco Bowl, back-to-back 10-plus win seasons. Overall, like, great production there for Memphis. Seth Hennigan, not there. So I don't know that I expect Memphis to stay on top right now, right? I don't know that I would expect Memphis to stay in the same spot. They could have a great guy coming in after him. I would still expect a step backwards, just because it's really hard to live up to that in your first year starting. If it's, transferring schools, if they bring in a guy in a transfer portal or something like that, whatever it turns out to be, it's really hard to fill those shoes. And so that would be a place where I say I'm not necessarily expecting Memphis to stay to that standard. Tulane's another one, right? They lose their coach a couple years, and so that's tough to lose their coach. They found a great one to replace him with. But then you look at this year, like Darian Mensah had a great year. He's leaving for Duke. Mekhi Hughes, obviously fantastic. He leaves to go to Oregon. I don't know who they're going to replace those guys with. It seems like they can kind of reload and find talent, so maybe that stays the case. But you can again, similar to Memphis, you can put me in the category of I don't know how they're going to replace that come next season, right? I don't know what they're going to do to replace it. And even if they get guys that are really talented, again, like, can you expect the same thing from them when these guys have been carrying that mantle for these teams?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's always going to be the struggle of doing well in the G5. Like we talked about off the top, your players are going to be looking for an opportunity at a bigger school. I do think some of these schools are better set up than others from an NIL perspective to maybe keep some of these guys
Sure.
or attract transfers even from the G5 level and compete with some of those guys. Let's go out west away from the American. Also, slight correction. I did say Southern Miss is in the American. They are in the Sun Belt. That's on me.
Sure.
We'll talk about the Tulsas and the Rices of the world, I guess, when we talk about the bottom of the American. Out west, we had UNLV pushing Boise State all year long. They played a couple of really close games against the Broncos, especially that one in Vegas in mid-October. That one was a really fun game on a Friday night that we got to have a national TV audience for. But UNLV, obviously, Haj Malik Williams replaced Matthew Sluka 3 weeks in. There was that whole drama with him accusing them of not having the NIL money that he was promised, yada, yada, yada. Haj Malik Williams takes over. The offense finds a completely new gear. And he led UNLV almost to a conference championship and almost to potentially a playoff berth if they could have found a way to knock off Boise State there at the end of the year. But a lot of turnover. Obviously, they lose their head coach as well. Haj Malik Williams graduated, and Barry Odom is off to coach elsewhere. So how does a program like UNLV, they're not a known power at the G5, right? Like Barry Odom comes in, orchestrates this massive turnaround, but now they have to find a way to find staying power. What would you do if you're a UNLV? What are you outside of trying to nail the next head coaching hire? What are you doing as a UNLV athletic director, booster person to really make sure that you have staying power at that level and you don't fall off back to where you were?
Well, first off, they did a good job. They brought in Dan Mullen, so that's going to be exciting for them to get a guy who's had experience at a big program. Obviously, didn't really work out at Florida. Did really well for himself at Mississippi State, though. Like he has run bigger programs in bigger conferences and done well with it. So I think that that's an exciting moment for them to say, like, hey, like I know it didn't work out at your last stop, but here you are. Give us a however many years it is that you have, maybe before he makes another jump, but at least you stabilize the program after losing a guy like Barry Odom. And then, I think it's just sell the fact that you are the Vegas team, right? It's kind of fun. You can kind of say like, hey, we're Vegas. The stadium we play in is cool. Like we're not some like smaller type school. We get some built-in advantages being in Vegas. So I think that's kind of a fun way to sort of pivot that direction. And just try to do everything you can to win in the NIL space, get the guys that you can. It's all that it takes to build a program now in modern college football also applies to the G5 guys. They just have to be really good at their scouting. They just really have to nail the picks. They can't afford to go out and say, well, we're going to go grab 20 guys in the transfer portal that are all, highly touted. And if like 5 of them or 10 of them don't work out, like it's going to be a worse season than we thought, but it's okay, right? They have to nail the picks that they make. And so if they're able to nail those picks, and a guy like Dan Mullen certainly knows what talent looks like, they can have a little bit of staying power. They could definitely make it in this new era. Again, the one thing that set them apart last year is the fact they couldn't get over the Boise hurdle. No Ashton Jeanty might make it a little bit easier for them to get over that hurdle. So, again, I'm not necessarily going to pick them to win sitting here at the beginning of March, but, I think it's a conversation to have and certainly something to monitor as we go forward.
I always have thought that UNLV was kind of a sleeping, I hate to use the term sleeping giant. That's so overused and it's kind of weird to say at the G5 level, but I always thought that they could be better than they were. You saw Nevada have some success about 10, 15 years ago when they were running that pistol with Colin Kaepernick, right?
Yep.
You saw, obviously, UNLV has pulled themselves up over the last couple of years, but there's a ton of talent in Arizona and Nevada and Southern California that they can't all go to the big schools down there. They can't all get exported to the SEC or the Big Ten, but there's plenty of leftover talent where they can fill out a roster that's really competitive. And yeah, take your pick from the transfer portal and recruit off of Vegas and living in a really fun city.
Well, and the weird thing too is, so I was looking at this to make sure I remembered it correctly. So Barry Odom went to Purdue. I don't know that that's a better move. I know it's a bigger school. I know that there's probably more funding, whatever it is, but I don't know that that's a better move in this moment in college football. You have, I think, a better path to a playoff at UNLV than you do at Purdue, because I think that with Purdue, obviously you have to get over the hump of all of the teams in the Big Ten, and it's going to be hard to wiggle your way into the playoff from there. If you're Barry Odom and you get a chance to go back to UNLV and maybe keep some players with you, build off of something, pitch something to guys in the portal, whatever it is, you have a chance to go be that top G5 school, make your way into the playoff. That's not nothing. I think that's something you got to consider. So, I mean, good for him. He gets a job that he wants. But I think I'd rather be Dan Mullen right now than Barry Odom. I'd much rather be in a spot where I think I can win and maybe have a chance to make a run at a playoff.
No offense to the good folks of West Lafayette, Indiana, but yeah, I think I'd rather live in Las Vegas.
Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yeah, or Lafayette, Louisiana. Just kind of rolled off the tongue there, but
on the western side of the city, none to y'all at all. Maybe the east side, but not west side.
I-10 goes both ways, and there's a long bridge down there too. Let's talk about some teams that flashed some brilliance this year, Garrett. These are teams that weren't necessarily playoff contenders, but definitely showed us something throughout the year that gave us something to be excited about. I'm going to start with East Carolina. They won 5 of their last 6 after a really rough start, including beating NC State in a bowl game. And oh, by the way, they open next season with NC State. Also in this tier, we've got the boys, the Bearcats, right down the street from me. They won 10 games in year 2 in the FBS. UConn was a hair away from 10 wins. Buffalo won 5 straight to close the season. Bowling Green, the Fighting Harold Fannons, scared the crap out of Penn State and A&M. Their record doesn't show how good they were because they really challenged themselves out of conference, but man, that was a good football team that really flashed at times. Wazoo, weird year, being in the Pac-2 and having a schedule alliance with the Mountain West and all that stuff, but we were legitimately trying to paint a path to the playoff in mid-November when they were like 8-1. And then a couple more, James Madison and Georgia Southern out of the Sun Belt. James Madison, if you'll recall, had a 70-50 win over UNC in late September. And Georgia Southern...
Yeah, but what'd they do in football? That's the basketball score, right?
Incorrect. North Carolina fans would not be surprised if they lost to James Madison by 20 this year because they're not very good on the hardwood.
Very good at basketball this year, yeah.
But no, that was the football score. That was the patented Mac Brown defense in Chapel Hill that Bill Belichick will have to find a way to fix. And then Georgia Southern in that same division, they beat the good teams in the division. They were a thorn in the side of the top half of the Sun Belt East and really struggled against the bottom half. Their losses to Old Dominion and Troy, who I think were like a combined 7-10 or something like that, 7-11 in conference play, really sunk the ship for Georgia Southern. So, Garrett, pick a card, any card. Where do you want to go from that wide-ranging tier there?
Man, from this tier, I think I just want to give another round of applause to Harold Fannin Jr. and Bowling Green. Yeah, they challenged themselves. Sometimes I think, like, what if they had scheduled like a couple of teams that were a little easier than Penn State and A&M, right? Like, what if they had scheduled like maybe a UCLA and they go out there and beat UCLA, and then maybe schedule like a Big 12 mid-tier to like a Baylor or someone like that, right? And they go and beat Baylor. You're looking at 2 more wins, which means you're probably playing a better bowl game. And probably going to go win that bowl game against that mid-tier team that you end up getting. So could have been a lot better year if they hadn't tried so dang hard playing in two of the toughest venues in all of college football. But you got to give them their flowers. You got to give them a round of applause. Harold Fannin Jr., maybe one of the best tight ends to play the game. I'm really excited to see what he does with his pro career. Going to be one of my the sneaker rookie draft picks in fantasy football next year, depending on his landing spot. 117 catches, over 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns. Take a bow. Just fantastic job. The career number is great. Just an awesome season, an awesome year for them. And yeah, I think that they deserve their flowers. It was a really, really good season for them. And yeah, it's just exciting times there. This is one of the teams I don't know what to expect next. I don't know really what is going to come next for Bowling Green. But I do know that this season was really cool.
I'll talk about Sam Houston and give them some flowers as well. 10 wins, year 2 in the FBS. That's just absolutely incredible. They beat Georgia Southern, the aforementioned Georgia Southern Eagles in the New Orleans Bowl in a really fun game. This was not a team that threw the ball consistently well. Like if you go down their game logs, a lot of times their quarterbacks were not throwing for a ton of yardage. And Hunter Watson was a gamer, and they didn't ask him to throw that much. They asked him to run way more often than throw, it seemed at times. But wasn't an elite passing offense, but it was a dang good rushing offense and a really solid defense that led them to some just grinded out wins down the stretch. They had a stretch in the middle of the year. They lost to Western Kentucky at home on a Wednesday night, 31-14. That's when Hunter Watson got hurt in that game, I believe, and was replaced by the backup. Then they go in and win with that backup with Jace Bauer, 10-7 at FIU. Just grind it out, find a way. They come back home against La Tech. Hunter Watson is back in the lineup. It's a 9-3 win. And then they go to Kennesaw, Georgia, and win 23-17 in overtime. And this is a team that we kind of pointed in the preseason of like, hey, they lost a lot of close games in their first year at the FBS level. I'm pulling up their schedule right now. They started 0-8, Garrett, and all but one of their games were decided by 14 points of fewer in that 0-8 start. And then they finished 3-9. Their last loss was 28-23 as well. So 8 of their 9 losses in their first year were by 14 points or fewer. Mm-hmm. And they flipped the script on that in 2024. They found a way to win. Obviously, Casey Keeler is off to Temple to become the head coach up there. But I'm growing in confidence on the Phil Longo hire. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't crazy about it when they first hired him. I know he has the history there. He was the offensive coordinator. But I'm picking up excitement on the Phil Longo hire, and I think it could be
fan of the show. Phil Longo follows the Twitter, so
absolutely, yeah. Shout out, Phil. Hopefully you catch this clip later this week, but I'm really excited. Maybe I can, maybe if you want to do an interview, I'm like 30 minutes down the road.
I'd happily have him on. That'd be a lot of fun.
Absolutely, I'll come do it in person. I'm 30 minutes from Huntsville. Yeah. Not a bad drive for me at all down Highway 30. But yeah, so Sam Houston, fantastic season. UConn. Shout out to our boy Bobby that holds it down on the UConn beat on Twitter.
Absolutely.
He was rewarded this year. He was not rewarded for his confidence in 2023, but they bounced back in a big way, got a bowl win in the Fenway Bowl as well. And I guess like the only other weird one that really sticks out to me is Wazoo, because this is a school that they're losing a ton in the portal this year. I think a lot of their players decided to give it one shot and then realize that it's a little different playing Pac-12 stadiums versus Mountain West and whatever the new Pac-12 looks like stadiums. And obviously Mateer is leaving for Oklahoma. They lost several other key contributors as well. It's a sketchy future for Wazoo and Oregon State. And then hopefully I'm rooting for them to dominate that new Pac-12, whatever that looks like starting next year. But man, that future just seems on thin ice.
Yeah, that's not a team, either one of them, not a team I'd want to put any real stock in right now. Not because I don't believe in them, not because I think that they're bad programs, but just because I have no idea what the future holds for either of these teams. And as the conference shifts and as teams realign again and they try to bring the Pac-12 back and weaken at Bernie's the conference or whatever they're going to try to do, I just don't trust very much right now. And since I don't know what the future holds for them, because the sport itself is pretty volatile, don't give me the two-person conference and tell me that either of these teams are a stable thing that you can bet on going forward. So, though I will hope, and though I will, excitedly, throw my hands up and say, hey, what do you know? When either of these teams decide to go off and make a little run or win 10 games or whatever it is, I'll happily cheer them on. While that is true, I'm not going to bet on either of them right now just because I have no idea what the future holds.
Yeah, Jake Dickert left for Wake Forest, of course, too. They did hire a winner, so I'll give him that. Jimmy Rogers is coming over from South Dakota State, obviously has won a national championship with the Jackrabbits, so they hired a winner, and that's the best that you can do in a situation like that. And they'll try to figure out life continually in a really weird situation, a G5, G6, or kind of on the border of a power conference. I do think the winner of the Pac-12 is going to be in a prime position most years for the college football playoff, just from a brand perspective and just the respect that a lot of those teams do have. But It's going to be an uphill battle, as we all knew when they got left behind by those teams moving to the Big Ten and the Big 12. Let's change the tune just a little bit, Garrett. On that somewhat somber note, we'll talk about a little bit more disappointing teams to close it out. And this is not teams that had to fire their coach or teams that we expect to be towards the bottom. This is 4 teams that really we're not sure what happened this year. Maybe we can paint a picture for some of them, but in the preseason, we were expecting them to be contenders for the college football playoff, and they just fell off for one reason or another. We'll start with Texas State, and it feels harsh to call a team that had never been to a bowl game before 2023 and got back to a bowl game in 2024 a disappointment for getting to and winning a bowl game. But man, we were pushing for a Sun Belt title on the show. A lot of other shows were as well. Obviously, Jordan McLeod coming over from James Madison was a huge boost. You get the Sun Belt Player of the Year on your team. You should expect to compete for the conference title. And they were in most of the games that they played, but that defense just really held them back. The offense was humming, but the next step for Coach Kinney in San Marcos is figuring out the defense and finding a way to get some more talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, it just wasn't the year that they expected to have. It just wasn't the year that I think any of us expected them to have, and I think that's kind of the big point there is just to say, some of these G5 teams that looks good on paper, right? And it's a lot of transfers that are coming in that had success at a previous location, and they're doing fine there, but it just didn't really work out the way they wanted it to. Again, the offense was great, just man, that defense was pretty tough. And that's a team too that took playoff contender Arizona State to the wire.
Yeah,
and they took a playoff team that made a run and looked really good through the year. They took them down to the wire, and it took some real heroics out of Scadaboo to win that game for them. So it's a really weird situation with that team where you really saw some flashes of brilliance this year, and it just did not materialize over the course of the season.
Yeah, and like I said, the margin for error is so thin in the G5, like the difference and the talent disparity in those mid-level teams, right? Like you can throw them in a blender most years and come out with any random order, and you're probably going to be closer than trying to predict it in the preseason because the margin is just so thin. So if one side of the ball is just severely lacking like it was for the Bobcats this year, it's going to result in more losses than you should have, and the sum's going to be a little bit less than the parts, especially when you look at the offensive side of the ball. Speaking of the sum being less than the parts, Liberty, woof. Guys, this is not harsh to put the Flames, who had the worst strength of schedule in all of college football, and still found a way to lose 4 games. I feel like every time towards the end of the season I was turning on Tuesday night CUSA action, they're losing. They're playing with their food in the best case, and they're losing in the worst case to teams that are just infinitely less talented than them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about Liberty season. This is a team that I think obviously we expected a lot out of them, but it seemed fair. Like it seemed fair to expect a lot out of them because they had shown us that they could handle that. Again, just didn't materialize.
Yeah, pulling up that schedule to just hammer home my point.
Mm-hmm.
Down the stretch, they just could not be counted on either side of the ball. Really, Caden Salter, obviously a great player, but starting 5-0, they get upset at Kennesaw State. I believe that was Kennesaw State's first or second win as an FBS program.
I think that was the first. I think that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a massive deal. They stormed the field
on that one. I think they rushed
they absolutely rushed the field because I think Liberty was ranked at that point, if I remember correctly.
At 5-0,
they follow that up to losing to Jacksonville State. Now, Jacksonville State obviously won the conference, so you're not gonna poo-poo them too much for that one. But you go to Sam Houston to end the year, you get embarrassed by a team that threw for 83, typically could not throw for more than 100 yards on the year. And then you just don't show up in the bowl game. I know Salter was already gone at that point. It opted out and was in the portal, but you don't show up against Buffalo and you get embarrassed in the Bahamas Bowl as well. It's a disappointing season for the Flames, and it felt like they kind of had something. They felt like they were kind of breaking through to be potentially a G5 power. I mean, we were talking about how they definitely needed to schedule better to make sure that they were positioning themselves for the playoff. But yeah, Jamie Chadwell and company definitely need to do some soul searching as they try to replace a ton of talent in this offseason.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, cool. Let's keep going. We got two more.
I couldn't say it better.
Two more disappointing. And saying Jacksonville State did make me realize that I skipped over giving accolades to Ohio and Marshall, who won their conference but were not in contention for the playoff. Army won the American, obviously, too. But yeah, Tim Albin and his DC are heading to Charlotte, so definitely something to watch at Ohio. But they weathered a portal. I hesitate to even call it a storm. It was a hurricane this last offseason and found a way. That's a program that's used to winning at this point, so we'll see how they respond. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Marshall had to opt out of a bowl game because of the number of players that they had in the transfer portal, but such is life as a G5 program. You win your conference and you're still going to be really fighting that battle to keep your players and your coaches from moving on. Last two teams I want to talk about here, Garrett, South Florida and App State. South Florida had a brutal opening to their schedule. In their first 6 games, they faced Alabama, Miami, Memphis, and Tulane. And they went 0-4 in those games. And obviously losing to Alabama and Miami is very forgivable if you're South Florida, but you would have loved to see them beat at least one of those one of those tough conference games to start off.
Well,
because especially since they were giving
good swings at them too.
Yeah, they were getting hyped as like one of the hot teams out of the American because of who they had on that roster. Quarterback play was really good coming into the season. It just didn't materialize for them.
They trailed Alabama by 5 points with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They had them. They were right there. Obviously, you look at the final score, the wheels came off in those last 6 minutes. Bama rattles off 3 touchdowns to make it look like they did Bama things. They didn't do Bama things.
We watched that game all together, I think, and
we were all together
on the edge of our seats for a good chunk of it. Yeah,
almost the upset. And kind of a similar story for the Miami game as well. Not as late in the game, but, I mean, they were leading that game up until there were like 2 minutes left in the half. So they were up in that game. They were kind of going back and forth with Miami. Miami obviously rattled off a whole bunch of points in the second half. And USF was done scoring when they hit 15. So that was that. But, just not the year that I think a lot of us expected for them. Definitely not the year that they expected for themselves. Again, similar issues where the defense let them down. They were 33rd in scoring offense. They were 99th in scoring defense. You can't give up points like that and expect to win a whole bunch of games.
Yeah, Bryce Archie filled in admirably down the stretch. He did kind of right the ship a little bit, got them wins against some lower level teams in that conference, and they did pull out a epic win over San Jose State in the Hawaii Bowl. That was a really fun game to take in on Christmas Eve. But yeah, just not the conference title contender that we thought they were, and we figured that out really early on in the season, unfortunately. Last one we'll talk about here is App State, and they missed a bowl for the second time in 3 years, and that feels like a really crazy thing to say when you think about Joey Aguilar coming into the season being what we thought was probably going to be the best quarterback in G5 and pushing for one of the best quarterbacks in America. And man, did it just not materialize for App State. Obviously, the aftermath of Hurricane Helene definitely didn't help. That there were way more important things going on than figuring out a football team in Boone, North Carolina for portions of this year. But the cracks were showing well before that, right? Like they had the Liberty game canceled in late September, but before that, they had already lost by 46 to Clemson, barely beat East Carolina, and lost 48-14 to South Alabama in their conference opener. So the cracks were already showing, and this was just a team that by the end of the year seemed like they kept putting up fights. They were in a lot of the games, right? They lose close to Louisiana. They lose relatively close to Coastal Carolina. They lost by 9 in the finale when they're fighting for bowl eligibility at Georgia Southern. But this was just a team that never quite put it together, and it's really surprising to me.
Yeah, and it's a team that I think we've come to expect a lot out of, it should go to show you that this program has been built in a way that I think it is pretty long-standing. But I think we now have to kind of ask those questions of like, hey, was that actually a good program, or were we just kind of on a good couple of years? And, we'll see you again in a decade when you decide to upset another top team or something. There'll be a moment when you go out there and you go beat USC on the coast when they're ranked number 5 or something, and 6 or 7 years from now. But I don't think that's the case. I think they bounce back. I do think that there's better times ahead. Obviously, with the hurricane and everything else, that was tough to finish the year. Again, like you said, like more things to think about than football. But yeah, it was just a tough situation. So I think they'll bounce back. I will say this has one of those like Disney story type things to it where they could come on a crazy run next year just because of what their community needs and how much this could mean to the community and kind of the surrounding area. So I wouldn't be shocked if it has a little bit of Disney magic to it next year. But it's definitely a program to watch and monitor and see how they're going to respond this offseason going into next year.
Well, and the program has high expectations, right? They let Sean Clark go. They hire Dowell Logans away from South Carolina. He was their offensive coordinator. So look for there to be a really fun offense in Boone with,
or at least a good QB run game if he's from South Carolina
with that pedigree. Absolutely. So yeah, Garrett, a lot of fun talking about the G5. We love talking about the G5 on this show. We hope you guys like listening about the G5 because we're not going to stop talking about them. We really do enjoy talking about that level of football. Again, like I said off the top, make sure that you're following along at 3TechPod on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe to the YouTube channel to make sure you are not missing a single thing of our off-season content. We got a lot of fun stuff planned. We've got some interviews coming down the pipe. We've got some fun content series looking back at some previously really fun teams from years past to kind of help get us through the off-season. Listen, a lot of programs might be skipping and quitting on spring games, but we're not quitting on spring content. We are not scared of the transfer portal. We feel very confident that we can keep everybody here. I know we haven't seen Mitch in a little bit, but we feel very confident that we can keep everybody right here at 3Tech HQ.
Yep, good times ahead.
Great times ahead on that note. That's Garrett Turney. I threw it to him very awkwardly. That's on me as a host. That's Garrett Turney. I'm Trey Reeves. We can't wait to talk to you guys again soon, and we'll see you guys next time.
Gracious him. How about